I was trained as a clinical pharmacologist, and I've been doing this for more than half a century. And I think what's happened in the last 20 years has been the beginnings of an awareness amongst my medical colleagues that the world of natural pharmacology, which people often refer to as nutrition, is in some ways richer, it's more diverse, and more important than the world of synthetic pharmaceutical pharmacology. Now, there are historical reasons for the dominance of pharmaceutical technology because medicine started off in a place when the most important causes of illness and death were infection. And from that, you have magic bullets, you have the work of Louis Pasteur, etc. And that gives us the modern pharmaceutical industry, which still really focuses on specificity, targeting receptors and enzymes. They're still talking about magic bullets, but it's been increasingly understood by the medical profession, or at least those of them who are not simply shilling for the pharmaceutical industry, that drugs do not cure illnesses. They treat the symptoms of illnesses, which we now understand are caused by and large by lifestyle. Not all of them, about 10% is genetic, but a lot of the rest is environmental. And by environmental, I mean diet. So that idea has been percolating through to the doctors. And one of the reasons that they've been forced to take this on board is that despite a century of pharmaceutical research and the development of all kinds of very powerful and very specific and very toxic drugs, we've been looking in the wrong direction because in the background, public health has deteriorated. It's deteriorated considerably, and we see the chronic degenerative diseases, almost all of them, increasing in frequency and decreasing in latency. So we see more of them in every age group, and we see them emerging in younger and younger groups of patients. And the doctors, with all of the modern pharmaceutical tools that they have at their disposal, understand that they're actually not addressing this. We're treating the people who are coming in with symptoms, but more and more of them are coming in. We can't cope. We need to start to focus on what is causing these problems, going to the source and putting them right. And that's where natural pharmacology comes in. Now, the field of nutritionals, I think, has been very badly damaged by a lot of companies who've sold supplements, which are clearly, if you understand anything about biochemistry and physiology, have no relevance at all to people's health. I mean, the multi-billion-dollar fish oil industry has been a complete washout. We know that it doesn't work. The fish oil has a talismanic value, but that's all. The multivitamins have also been tested and found to have no effect. And so many of my medical colleagues, when they look at the nutritional sector, they think, what a complete waste of time. This does not work. It has been proved not to work. And I'm very skeptical of most companies who are working in the supplements field. A lot of them don't know what they're doing. But I've already said, there's a problem with the pharmaceutical sector. There's got to be something different. And it turns out there is something different. It's not pharmaceuticals. It's not classic nutrition. It's what we call pharmaconutrition. This is the new science, and it's actually rather respectable. In fact, there's a wealth of data in the medical and scientific press and in our libraries and archives that demonstrate just how important it is. So pharmaconutrition, let me quickly define it, because this is, I think, the basis of probably public health and to a large scale individual health management in this next century. That starts with a deeper understanding of what are the multiple metabolic errors, not just one, as in the magic bullet hypothesis, but the many errors, the metabolic errors that are caused by our terrible lifestyles and diets. And then we cross-reference against those errors the known pharmacological actions of different foods and food derivatives. So instead of trying to shoot people with magic bullets, we're giving them a safety net. We're giving them multiple supports, which are designed to rectify not just one metabolic error, but all of those ones that we can identify that are leading towards disease. I've been teaching this for, I first coined the term pharmaconutrition almost 40 years ago, and I was ridiculed because I remember being at a meeting in London with 20 other professors, and they were saying, "Oh, what the hell is pharmaconutrition?" And I tried to define it, and people were interested, but they said, "Well, nice idea, prove it." And what has happened in the last 30 years, and increasingly the last 20 and the last 10, I can see the rate of change accelerating is that these ideas are becoming more widely accepted. And what I have seen with Zinzino gave me the opportunity to develop this concept of pharmaconutrition into a small and I think very effective portfolio. Doctors in many different countries have been using these products, seeing the results in their own patients, in their own family members, often in themselves, and they're coming to join us in their hundreds. And I welcome that because, I want to improve public health. That's what my work has always been all about. But it's very important for me to build and maintain bridges with my colleagues in the medical and in the clinical scientific profession. I want to bring them with me. Increasingly, that's what's happening now. So,
well, I think that's really what you've done so well, and you've excelled in the last 5 years plus. And I know I've been working with you for about 7 years now. But as we've been bringing products to market and seeing the things that you've done in the last 5 years, and I mean even just with the Zinzino side, what the products that you've helped formulate, the products that you're bringing to market, they really are the next generation. You've done so, and it comes from that knowledge of yours, that and I'm going to say it, 35, 40 years of knowledge of what you put together to now end up with outstanding products from the science that you've learned from all the things, the generations of learning of your peers.
Well, I'm a keen student of medical history, and I think you really do understand, you have to understand where your science comes from if you want to understand what the biases are that were built into the model. They're most evident in the early phases, and then they become invisible. We forget about them. And it's only when you go back to the beginnings of the pharmaceutical model that you realize, oh, that's why they did this. That's why it developed in the way that it did. That is why it has the weaknesses and limitations that it very obviously does have. And what I find is that when you put me in front of a group of medics, and I can explain this to them in simple language, and they get it. They get it. There's no point in me talking to most doctors about nutrition. They're not very skeptical about that, and with good reason. I don't do that. I talk to them in terms of pharmacology, the pharmacological functions of foods and food derivatives. And they're trained in pharmacology. When you go through medical school, that's one of the disciplines that you spend time acquiring. And then when I use that language, it's much more palatable for them. I can understand what I'm talking about. And then in a way, it uses the same principles that pharmaceutical pharmacology does. So we're still talking in terms of enzyme systems and receptors. They find that comforting. So they know what that's about. And we're simply approaching them from a different angle with actives that are far safer, that have much wider therapeutic indices because they come from foods that we have consumed for millennia. So what we do is intrinsically safer, and what we have been demonstrating over the last 5, 10, 20 years is that this approach is far more effective, and it's curative as opposed to being palliative.
So let's talk about those man-made diseases that are out there, okay? And you and I have watched them over, and I've been in the industry about 20 years now, obviously yourself a little bit longer, but watching those man-made diseases kill people bigger than what we've got right now. The numbers are much bigger than the coronavirus that's killing people on a daily basis. Cancer, heart, stroke, diabetes, all these man-made diseases. I'd like to talk about them and then lead into where you're at with the product range that we have here in Australia and the balance test. They're the 3 points I'd like to touch on in the next 10, 15 minutes.
Well, coronavirus is generating a lot of publicity right now, but I'm very suspicious about the way in which this story is being blown up by the media and by the press. In an average year, influenza kills 500,000 people anyway. On a bad year, the Hong Kong flu, for example, killed 1 million. Then you go back to the so-called Spanish flu, 1918-19, that killed between 50 and 100 million, which was possibly 4 or 5% of the entire world's population at that time. So what we're seeing with coronavirus in that context is frankly not such a big deal. And there's lots of coronaviruses floating around anyway. Tides of coronaviruses are washing constantly around the world. I mean, we have, I think, about 80 billion colds a year, and more than half of those are caused by coronaviruses, and most of them are mild and self-limiting. So what's special about COVID-19? Well, it's got great PR.
Yes.
And the media, we have more awareness. We can measure these things. We can detect who has the virus and who hasn't. And so we're actually more aware of how it's developing. And the media love to tell scare stories, and the politicians love to keep us scared and powerless as well. The problem with COVID-19 is that it's probably not killing any more people than other influenza-type epidemics have done, but it's so infectious and it moves very quickly. And so instead of getting a large number of people over a long period of time, you get a large number of people lumped up together and they're swamping the hospital system. And that's really the major difference. It's an area that I'm sorry. We can talk about therapeutic approaches to that too, if there's time. And there's some very interesting new developments in that area, which again are coming from this field of natural pharmacology. But you're right. At the moment, the main cause of illness and death isn't infectious, and it's not COVID-19. It are what you call man-made diseases, what I would prefer to call diseases of civilization. And they certainly have been increasing. We see far more of them than we have ever done before. And the fact that they're all increasing, pretty much in parallel, is enough to tell any toxicologist or that what we're seeing is a mass poisoning, a mass chronic poisoning. We're seeing a human population that is being weakened and damaged and actually being destroyed by an absolutely appalling food environment that has become steadily worse since 1950 due to the criminal irresponsibility of the multinational food companies, who are now responsible for more illness and death than the tobacco industry.
That's insane when you think about that, actually. And, that statement within itself, the way the man-made diseases, or these diseases are growing rapidly, all because of, basically what we're consuming. Now, let's just flip to that, the omega-3/6, your discoveries of that. Talk to me about let's get deep into it and say, okay, this is what you've discovered over the last 10, 15, 20 years.
Okay, well, let me just make one thing very clear. I didn't discover a lot of this. I'm not that kind of scientist anymore. I haven't been for a while. I'm really a secondary level scientist, a parasite, if you like, and I depend on the work of other clinicians and clinical scientists who are in the labs, in the wards. What I do is I look over their shoulders. Right. And I go and talk to them. I talk to many of them all the time. And what I'm doing is assembling data, collecting huge amounts of data, digesting it, or trying to, and developing overreaching and wider angle models that I think help to explain why public health has deteriorated in the way that it has, and how we can take very simple pharmaconutritional steps to rectify that. It's very clear that omega-3s have a role to play, and an important one. Mm-hmm. But it's equally clear that omega-3s on their own are not the way to go. In fact, they're useless. We've got 26 prospective, double-blinded, randomized clinical trials showing that the omega-3s have little to no effect in protecting against coronary artery disease, stroke, dementia, retinopathies. It is simply an inappropriate model where we started with the epidemiology. We worked out that eating fish is actually quite good for your health, and then these two Danish physiologists called Bang and Duerberg went to Greenland, and they looked at the diet that the Inuit were eating. They measured the frequency of certain degenerative diseases in that population and said, they're being protected somehow. It must be the omega-3s in the fish that they're eating. And what we now know is that really they made a huge conceptual error. They were half right. Omega-3s were a part of it, but they were completely wrong because omega-3s on their own don't work. And the reason why they were thinking it's got to be one thing was because their thinking was saturated in the pharmaceutical model. One active, one effect. Well, fellas, that works with drugs, sort of. It does not work in nutrition. And it turns out that there are more things in an oily fish than just omega-3s. And in fact, what is protective in oily fish is a kind of a binary weapon. Omega-3s and some very, very special lipophilic or fat-soluble polyphenols. Together, they're extremely effective indeed. Separate them out, and you end up with nothing, really. You end up with an enormous industry, the fish oil industry, which is completely bogus, which is making billions of dollars from selling you junk that actually, the smart guys, the people who run these companies, no, has no effect. It's a confidence trick.
So tell me that blend that we've got, okay, in obviously the Zinzino balanced oil, the blend that you've been, sort of instrumental in helping get it to market, get it to what I call its peak performance level. Tell me some of the key things there, and then let's talk about the balance test. When you brought all that together, when those two parties came together, just tell me the marriage and what makes that so special.
Well, before I do, I don't want to take the credit for this. There's some other very, very good scientists who are involved in this, and one of them is Ola Ada, who helped with this in Zinzino. And in fact, I was advising his company before that company was bought by Zinzino. But before him, there were many others, and I would say Eilertson is a very important scientist who's been working in this area. And in fact, I'll show up one of his papers in the end of this presentation. But I think that what happened was that there's so much noise, so many products floating around, most of them useless. You have a regulatory system that makes it difficult for us to say, what is happening here? What effect does this really have? We can't talk. We're gagged by a regulatory system that is frankly half a century out of date, if not longer. So that creates, I think, a really bad situation. How is the consumer to be able to differentiate between these products? How can they understand if we can't speak to them? It's really a mess. The situation at the moment in the supplement sector, you have a retail business that has no idea what they're selling on the street. You have consumers who've got no idea what they're buying. This is a terrible, terrible business model. No wonder people are confused. And we cannot assume, that all consumers are experts in nutrition. We can't force them to be experts. So these people are coming to the retail outlets, they're going online, and what are they buying? They're buying junk. They don't know any better. And the few companies who've got something that actually will exert a benefit are not able to talk about it. We need a regulatory change. I would like to say, though, that if the food industry were to change its ways, and instead of behaving in the criminally irresponsible way, and effectively committing genocide, which is what they're doing now. Public health malpractice is what they're doing. If they were to be slapped down and sat down and said, look, straighten up your act. If they were to start selling food products that were less toxic, that had a higher nutrient density, that were less pro-inflammatory, we wouldn't be needed. Supplements wouldn't be needed. And eventually, I think, and I hope that's where we will get to. But it's going to be a while. And in the meantime, that creates this enormous vacuum at the heart of public health, which we are trying to fill. Like I said, the omega-3s play a part in that, but it has to be the omega-3s plus.
Yep.
Pharmaconutrition doesn't work like a pharmaceutical approach. It is not a single molecule. What we're doing instead is to take the biological actives from a fish and reconstitute them in a bottle. So balanced oil is not fish oil. In fact, it's an oily fish in liquid form, if you like.
And that's the important factor when you start looking at that, okay? Now, Dr. Paul, your mic is just scratching a little bit as well somewhere, wherever your mic is, okay? And I just...
sorry about that. I tell you what, I'll just tucked inside my shirt, so let me...
there we go. Now we're seeing the real chest. There we go. That's better. I thought you were going to do the whole striptease for me. I was going to say, here we go.
You're not paying me enough, Robbie.
That's it. So when we look at this, and you've said that multiple times, the oily fish story, okay? It's what you've added to this, okay? What the scientists within the family of the Zinzino business has put together is really the end result of bringing all that science together, but utilizing this test, okay? And I believe that when you add these two together, that gives you a powerful, powerful formulation to help a human's body, to help a person get better on a daily basis by being able to test what their products they're taking.
The test is crucial. Most of the supplement business is, they're flying blind. They're using formulations which can't work. And there's no way to test that they're having any kind of effect at all. So this is not scientific. I don't want to be involved in anything like that. That's basically, it's a confidence trick. I think that before I would recommend that anyone buy any supplement, find out first whether you need it. And that's where the test comes in. What the test does is it measures the fatty acid profile of your cell membranes. And we're taking a small blood sample. It's a pinprick test, as you know. And then we send that off to a third-party independent laboratory, independently certificated and validated. It works, in fact, for the WHO. And they use very advanced technology to give you an entire readout of the fatty acids that have been incorporated into the cell membranes of your erythrocytes, which are a proxy for all the other body cells. We're not interested in plasma lipids. They are changing every hour depending on what you ate, your levels of physical activity, all kinds of things. Your cell membranes are a longer-term, semi-permanent record of your dietary habits and what they have been for the last 4 months. So for diabetics, it's like measuring HbA1c as opposed to blood glucose.
Yeah.
And what we're trying to do is spinning off from the results that we get. We can look at omega-3 and omega-6 and saturated fatty acid percentages in the cell membrane. And very importantly, we can look at the ratio between omega-6s and omega-3s. And this is really important because the omega-6s, specifically arachidonic acid, that's your parent omega-6 amino acid in the cell membrane, which these fatty acids are built into phosphatidyllipids, which form up these phospholipids form basically the backbone of your cell membrane. Arachidonic acid is broken down into a group of mediating compounds that are fundamentally pro-inflammatory. The omega-3s, when they are broken down, they produce compounds which I've got names such as resolvins and protectins, and as the name implies, they're all about stopping and resolving inflammation. Now, you need omega-6s and omega-3s because the omega-6s are absolutely essential if the body is attacked by, let's say, a pathogen, or there's been physical injury, and you need inflammation because inflammation is the way in which the body will deal with that pathogen or help to resolve the tissue injury. So you need to be able to start that sequence. And then once that threat has been neutralized, you require the omega-3s to stop the inflammation. So it's like the accelerator and the brakes of a car.
For sure.
And just as in the same way when you're negotiating heavy traffic in Melbourne, Sydney, or let's say Lagos, which is possibly the most ridiculous place in the world to drive, you need to use the accelerator and the brake judiciously and appropriately. And so it is in life. You're negotiating a lot of traffic, a lot of threats. You need to be able to start an inflammation sequence and stop it. And that's the dialectic of life itself. The problem is we have, as I said, this criminally irresponsible multinational food industry, which has given us a food space, a food environment, which is incredibly omega-6 top heavy. The omega-3s have gone. The omega-6s from plant oils, soy oil, corn oil, things like that, have been loaded into all of these kinds of foods. And so now we have a situation where, as opposed to the historical data, which tells us that until about 1900, our 6-to-3 ratios were about 2-to-1, 3-to-1. In Europe, we're now up at 15-to-1. North America, 25-to-1. I'm not sure what the situation is in Australia, but the fact that 50% of adult Australians now have a chronic degenerative disease tells me all I need to know. It tells me that your 6-to-3 ratios are also really high. You have chronic inflammation as a result, and that is what is driving this epidemic of chronic degenerative disease.
Correct.
So, yeah, the balance oil has been designed to rectify that problem. So if you're eating a great diet, do the test, and you have a good result, fine. You don't need us.
Done.
We don't need you. Why should you buy stuff that you don't need?
That's what I tell people.
Okay. And but if you have a result that says, well, this is a person who has a 6-to-3 ratio of 10, 15, 20 or higher, we see people coming in with ratios of up to 100-to-1, and boy, do they have problems. Then there is a justification. We can say, look, there is a problem here. Your lipid chemistry is really out of kilter. Take this balance oil, and partly because of the chaperone compounds, which are the polyphenols, we can guarantee that within 4 months, you'll bring your 6-to-3 ratio down to 5 or less. And using the test, you can prove it for yourself. You can actually see it happening. And as your ratios change, what we see is, and what the users notice, is that their conditions improve. So the signs of chronic inflammation fade, and eventually disappear. And when that happens, all kinds of clinical benefits spin off. I'm not sure I can legally tell you what they are, but they are considerable, they're important, and they're fundamental.
Yeah. Look, and that's what we're finding, the results of people taking the test, and I'm going to say at least 98% of the people that take the test, they then buy the product, okay, because the data is too compelling and proof defeats doubt, as I say. But what it does lead me to is some examples, okay, and I'm not sure of your feeling because, again, I've never asked you this question, but, when we talk about, and the buzzword, obviously, around the world, okay, is this CBD stuff that people talk about. And I keep saying, well, show me the proof. Give me an example test. Give me a CBD test that I can test myself so I can then take your product. Because people say it's the same cell membrane and all this type of stuff, okay, that the CBD oil produces in our body. What's your sort of quick, 2-minute feedback about when people say that to you?
I'm not against the CBD market. The good CBD products obviously do have some anti-inflammatory benefits, and there may, in fact, be some overlap between the biochemistry of the CBD metabolites and the fish oil metabolites. If you look at some of the fish oil metabolites, they're clearly working via the endocannabinoid system. And if you look at some of the CBD metabolites, this is very complex. Some of them are working through channels that you would more often associate with fish oil, with the omega-3s. I think the only thing I would say is that, first of all, we can't test you for CBD levels. There is really no biomarker that we can use. So we're flying blind. We don't really have much feedback on that. And secondly, CBD is more like a symptomatic treatment. With omega-3s, we're actually rebuilding the basic structure of your cell membranes and giving you very fundamental long-term protection. Taking CBD is a little bit more like taking an aspirin. So it'll have a quick onset of effect. You're dealing with some of the symptoms, but it's a kind of a temporary fix. What we're trying to do is something that's more structural and that's longer term. Having said that, you could combine the two. It does. One of the issues with using omega-3s, it takes a while to change over the chemistry, the structure of your cell membranes. That's a slow process. It can't be speeded up because the rate limiting step is the rate of turnover of these phospholipids in your cell membranes. So I think that there's a reasonable approach might be to say, okay, take CBD to start with, just to get you going, bring in the fish oil, and the fish oil will eventually get to the point where it takes over and is doing this rather more fundamental thing. And then at that point, you won't need the CBD anymore.
And talk about that time span. Now, we know it's 120 days. Tell me why the 120 days. When you do a balance test and you get on the oil and we say 120 days, just give me the science reason on that, if you don't mind.
I think I just did, Rob. We're changing the composition of the cell membranes.
Yes.
But they're relatively static, cell membranes. They're turning over slowly all the time because various phospholipids in the cell membrane are being broken down constantly for all kinds of external reasons, and they're being replaced all the time. But it's a slow process. Maybe you're only turning over 0.5% of the phospholipids in the membranes of a single cell on any given day.
Yeah.
So if we want to bring the ratio of 6s to 3s from 25-1 down to, say, 4 or 3-1, it's just a long, slow, gradual process. Let me think about it in this way. These diseases of civilization that we talk about, that are such a huge public health issue now, they take years to develop. What we're saying is the pharmaceutical approach is all about get rid of this symptom now. And doctors do have a duty of care to their patients who come in pain or suffering in some way. We want to fix them up right now. That's absolutely legitimate. But if you want to restructure the fundamental problems, which are to do with cell membrane structure and various other issues, that's equally a slow process. Not something we have to measure in decades, thank heavens, but it is 3 to 4 months. Now, having said that, what we are seeing in North America, where we have a lot of subjects with very, very high 6-to-3 ratios, they respond with clinical improvement and reduction of symptoms all kinds of problems, pain, disability, they start to respond very quickly because they're starting off from such a bad place. And even a minor improvement in their cell membrane ratios pays off. They experience the benefits, which then become more profound as they continue to bring the ratio down. In Europe, where your average is about 15 to 1, the changes in some cases take rather longer to become apparent. And we can say this with confidence because I think we're now well over 500,000
Correct.
tissue samples in our records, in our archives, which makes us by a long way the world experts. We have, I don't think any other lab in the world has got even a fraction of the amount of data that we've amassed over the years. So we have become the de facto experts. We have a better understanding of lipid profiles and therefore the lipid composition of the diets of many different regions of the world. We have a global overview now. And we're starting to talk to other academics who are interested in our data and understand how important it is.
And Dr. Paul, if I look at it and I ask you the question, a lot of people say, well, why don't I double the dose? Double the dose and see how quickly it can work on me. I think you said to me the other week that, Rob, that don't work. That dog don't hunt. You just take as per the instructions, and that's what you need to take. Is that correct?
I'm a little reluctant to tell people to take double doses. There are some very enthusiastic self-medicators who will drink half a bottle of this stuff for breakfast. I don't recommend that. I don't want people to overshoot and end up with ratios that are below 1 to 1. And you can do that if you take enough of this stuff for long enough. And if you do that, that's probably not a good idea because at that point you become immunosuppressed. Your blood won't clot. You're going to bleed out. This was first noticed, as I said, by those Danish physiologists Bang and Duerberg, who knew very well that while their Inuit subjects, the Greenlanders, may not have had very much chronic degenerative disease, if they developed dental decay, and they were starting to because they were starting to be westernized, all these terrible junk foods were ending up in Greenland, they would go to Denmark. Greenland was a Danish colony. For dental treatment, the dentist would get them into the chair, extract the tooth, and the Inuit would then bleed to death in the dentist's chair. And there are quite a few cases of that. So if someone over-medicates, drinks too much of this stuff, and then doesn't necessarily go to a dentist, but if they have an accident, a road traffic accident, they're going to bleed far more than they should. If they go for surgery, either elective or emergency surgery, it's going to be a real problem for the surgical team who won't be able to develop a clean operating field because the oozing simply won't stop.
Yeah.
So I don't want people to be taking vast and excessive doses. I'd rather people stayed within the guidelines that we know are effective and safe.
Yeah.
One of the great leaders in this area of omega-3s was a man called Sinclair, who was, I think, at Oxford University. He self-experimented with these omega-3s. He was a very eccentric man, but I think a very good scientist. And he had been to Greenland and he brought back freezers full of whale blubber. And he would sit in the laboratory every morning, chewing his way through pounds of this stuff. It stank the whole place out. The scientists I know who worked with him said it was unbearable. And God knows how he managed to force himself to eat this stuff every morning. And eventually he got to the point where if he just brushed against, the desk or something, he would bruise.
Wow.
Because you're sort of moving towards something that looks a little bit like hemophilia. So I don't want people to overdose.
Okay.
We want to. We do not want to expose anyone to unnecessary risk.
Yes.
We have a responsibility to our consumers and to the public in general to establish guidelines that will be effective but safe. The Hippocratic Oath, first do no harm. And that's engraved on my heart, and it should be on yours too.
Fantastic. And Dr. Paul, I'm going to get to close out with a couple of key statements, okay, or closing comments for 2 minutes. But I want to make sure everybody goes up to drpaulclayton.eu, drpaulclayton.eu. Unbelievable amount of research and documents and blogs and So much stuff available up there for you to grab hold of. Or just, again, just do a search of Dr. Paul Clayton online in Google, and you'll see so much work that this gentleman has done over the years. Dr. Paul, as we close out, your closing comments about Zinzino as a company and its products and the test, anything you'd like to leave with these guys now?
For many, many years, I've had one foot in the academic camp and one foot in the world of business, because if you want to change public health, you really have to be prepared to get your hands dirty. And so I've worked with various supplement companies. I've worked with a lot of the big pharmaceutical companies as well. And the reason I like Zinzino is that, first of all, they gave me this wonderful brief. When we first met, they bought this company that was making this an early version of balance oil. And they bought that company, and I was sort of hoovered up in that deal. I was part of the office furniture. And I had a chance meeting with Orion and Doug. And they said, do you want to continue an involvement with this? And I said, well, yeah, okay, but I'm actually more ambitious than that. There's more that I would like to do. And they said, well, what's that? I said, if you allow me an opportunity to do this, we can turn this company, which at that time was a coffee company, into a life science company. Because I had a very clear idea of the pharmaconutritional tools that we've now have in the marketplace. A lot of this information was already in the back of my head, and I knew where I wanted to go with this. And they were a bit skeptical. They talked to each other for a bit and then thought, well, okay, let's give this lunatic some space to work in. And they said, okay, well, we're open to that. And I said, well, okay, fine. What's your brief? And they said, do the best you can. And that was just fantastic, because I've worked with so many other companies in the past who said, well, it's got to be to a price point, or we have a warehouse full of this extract and you have to use that. It was just open field. I could fall back on all of the information, the clinical literature, the preclinical, like the epidemiology, this in vitro work, the cell culture studies, everything else, the ethnobotany, and from that derive a small set, a very small portfolio of products which I know are effective, and each one of which is designed to either inhibit or damp chronic inflammation in different parts of the body, or to provide the micro and phytonutrients that have been removed from the current diet. So if you do those two things, you damp chronic inflammation and stop excessive tissue destruction and replace all the cofactors that the body needs to heal, replace and regenerate, at that point, you switch from being catabolically dominant and moving towards progressive loss of healthy tissue. Now you become anabolically dominant. Now you're starting to heal. And this where we are now is it's the fulfillment of a set of ideas that I certainly had very fully fleshed out when I first met Doug and Orion, but which I'd been working on and which had gradually taken shape for the past half century.
And I think, Dr. Paul, that's the key thing. When you look at it, and you've now got nearly 300,000 people consuming this product on a monthly basis, or daily basis, and reordering on a monthly basis. When you look at those statistics from back then to where you are today, it's the army that you talk about. It's like the good cells attacking the bad cells. I know you've got to have a balance of them in your body, but we're out there, and it's our consumers that are out there saying, hey, you got to get on this oil. I'm just having unbelievable results. That's what it's really about. It's that army of people that you've always requested. The job is to get it out to people.
I'm really grateful to the Zinzino Army. I'm very grateful indeed. I find the current public health situation deeply offensive. We have a public that is so malnourished, so unhealthy as a result, so many of whom become ill too early, who die too early. Such a waste of human life and potential. And a pharmaceutical industry that sits on the back of that and parasitizes them and kills a lot of them, quite frankly. A food industry that has abandoned any concept of public health whatsoever, and the general public are being ground between these two millstones. It's an appalling situation. As I said, I find it deeply offensive. What Zinzino has done and what the Zinzino Army is doing is rectifying this terrible wrong. And if we continue in the way that we're doing, we will see improvements in public health. We will, unless we're stopped. I mean, we're treading on some very important toes now. We're competing with the pharmaceutical industry, and we are taking business for them by reducing the numbers of people who require their products.
Yep.
What we're doing is deeply critical of the food industry. We're showing by implication just how dangerous many of today's processed foods are. So we have a lot of enemies. And I'm not going to underestimate how powerful and how vicious some of these people can be. So I'm not saying this is all going to be plain sailing from here on in. I think that there'll be regulatory challenges brought by these stakeholder industries, and we will have to deal with those when they arrive. But what I can tell you is that we are very much aware of the terrain that we're working in. We know where the threats will come from. We think we know what they are, and we are preparing ourselves. We're going to be able to defend ourselves, and we are also recruiting some very important allies to help us in this coming struggle. But perhaps the most important of those allies are, as you say, the Zinzino army. These people are spreading the word. They're getting out there. They see the benefits themselves of these products. They share them. And a lot of this is happening under the radar, where the regulators can't actually see us or stop us. And it's a bit like, and I think about this often, it's a bit like the old samizdat, going back to the former Soviet Union, when there really wasn't very much free speech, and the media, the mass media, were rigidly controlled, as they are in North America today. And so people compensate for that. They get around that by, home printing, sheets of facts, of information, of news, and just posting them in the streets at night. We're doing something like that. We're doing good by stealth, because we have to. We have to be stealthy at this point. We're just the little woolly mammals running around at the feet of the great dinosaurs, the food industry dinosaur and the pharmaceutical industry dinosaur. And I'm sure that many of us still feel very small, very powerless, but we're going to take over.
Yeah, look, and I see Dr. Paul as the Zinzino family gets out there, and we start bringing on countries like Russia, India, Malaysia. We just purchased a company in Southeast Asia that has 6 major Asian countries that they have a footprint in. When you start adding all that together, that footprint, when it becomes 500,000, of consumers on a daily basis, that's when it starts really getting out there on the masses. And I can see that happening very, very quickly.
And then we will actually see public health figures starting to change. Once we have really significant numbers of people in any one country, you'll see life expectancy starting to improve, health expectancy starting to improve. And eventually, this truth will become so apparent that the current stakeholders will be forced to acknowledge the validity and the value of what we're doing. Yes. We are going to win. It may take a while for the truth to be allowed, but eventually it can't be stopped.
Correct. Okay, Dr. Paul, well, I just want to thank you again, and we go back to, guys, you've got the 2 greatest weapons available for you, the balanced oil and the balanced test. Proof defeats doubts, okay? Taking a test, 120 days on the product, take a further test, and then continuing on this product as prescribed, okay, by the scientists that have put the product together. Again, drpaulclayton.eu. Please go up and see this information. Please subscribe to the information that's up there, and let Paul just feed you the science that's available on the groundbreaking information that comes out. Dr. Paul, back to you to close out.
I'm not sure how you've structured this, Rob, but I've seen a couple of questions flash up at the bottom of the screen as we were talking. Is there time, is it possible for people to ask specific questions, which I could try at least to respond to?
By all means. I've answered most of them. Most of those I've asked as we've gone through. There's one here that I'll ask you directly, okay, if you don't mind. Okay, does the balanced oil give all cells protective membrane, good ones and the bad ones? I sort of semi-asked that, but I didn't ask it in that fashion.
Okay, so I think I know what you mean by bad cells. Is the balanced oil helping them to survive or not? Almost certainly not. In fact, we know that these bad cells have problems with omega-3s, that they don't seem to be able to protect their membranes against oxidative stress as well as healthy cells.
Okay, Dr. Paul. Again, drpaulclayton.eu, guys. Jump up, grab there's so much information there, and subscribe and just get this information out there. Let's be the army to tell the world about this incredible product that this gentleman has been one of the key people on helping put together and spreading the word as we take it around the world. Dr. Paul, thank you so much. Look forward to working with you continuously. And once we get back on a jet again, seeing you around the world in these great countries that are opening for Zinzino globally.
All right. Good night, everybody.
Thanks, guys. Take care.